Let's begin.
Okay. Now tell me about your childhood. Oh, hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. I was just experimenting a little in therapy research. It's going just as planned. Discovering the truths about our reality can be so satisfying. So, if you have a thirst for thick red knowledge, open those notepads and ready yourselves for a little terror tale that I like to call the Ascension Project.
What is to follow is absolutely true. You probably won't believe me, but that's just fine. That is exactly why I've chosen this avenue for divulging what I have to tell. What I know to be true, what I've seen, well, could get me killed if I talk about it. Still, I can't help it. Ever had something really horrible happen to you? I mean, really terrible, and been unallowed to tell anyone? It's like not being able to scream at the sensation of extreme pain. I can't bear it anymore. So, here, where tales of supposed true horror are abound and numerous, I will discuss what I know, hiding right out in the open, so to speak. Hopefully, getting this off my chest will help put my mind at ease. I guess I'll start with my childhood. Not in large detail, but enough for you to understand my drive. It will help you to comprehend why I did what I did, why I decided to sign on to conduct such obscure research. I grew up in the inner city, and life was, well, tough. My parents didn't make much, and although I loved them dearly, it gave me a motivation to do better for myself. I studied hard, got great grades, and earned a position at the top of my graduating class. From there, I got a sizable scholarship and a list of recommendations that propelled me to a prestigious university. What do I study? Well, it began with a degree in psychology, and, once achieved, led to enrollment in a degree in applied cognitive and perceptual psychology. I treat coursework in college the same as I did in high school. After all, I'm spending thousands of dollars in the end to obtain a higher education. I might as well achieve the highest grades possible and make the most of something that costs so much. I don't think I've ever been out of the top 5% of my class, even in my more challenging courses, and when I reached my parapsychology class, I suppose my efforts made me stand out like a sore thumb. Something about this class fascinated me. I mean, I thought I'd enjoy it, but even I couldn't expect the amount of intrigue that held my attention to the material. For the sake of anonymity, I will refer to the orchestrator of the project as Dr. Keller, as well as changing any subsequent names to follow. Keller was my professor for Psych 632, Paranormal Psychology, and he picked up on my enthusiasm quite easily, I'd imagine. I had spent a few hours with him after class, discussing the implications of the current day's lecture, so when he approached me specifically and asked if I'd like to help him with a personal research study, I was less surprised and more enthralled. Dr. Keller had done some groundbreaking research in the past, and I'd have been a fool to have turned him down. Well, so I thought. But in all honesty, for a grad student to be selected by the academic elite for work on a groundbreaking project is one hell of a prestigious honor. Without the relevant foresight, I happily agreed. I tried my best not to sound too enthusiastic, but I'm sure I did a pretty poor job at hiding my excitement. Keller went to his large desk and returned with a small white envelope that he outstretched for me to take from him. Once I did, he told me everything I needed to know was inside. I shook his hand and left the class long after everyone else had. I couldn't wait until I got to my car before I hastily opened the envelope like a child opening a present on Christmas morning. It was a set of instructions, a list, directions to where I assumed the team would meet, the date and time for showing up, one of Dr. Keller's phone numbers to call in case of questions and concerns, and a lot of other useful information, but nothing about what we would actually be doing. The only hint was printed at the top in the center, ambiguously hovering above everything else. The Ascension Project. I had never seen a driveway so long. It was more of a road than a driveway. I'd been driving down the length of it for so long, in fact, that I was debating with myself whether or not that was actually a mailbox I had seen and not a road sign. This couldn't be a driveway. Sure enough, just when I was about to make a 3 to 7 point turn and go back down this narrow path from whence I had come, the sturdy walls, dotted with large glass windows, peeked around the trees at the corner when I turned the bend. The home was nothing short of monolithic. This is his place? I have to land a job like his, I thought to myself. In all actuality, I'm still not really sure whether he owned the place or not. It could have been passed down to him, or rented for the duration of the project. Hell, he could have been squatting there for all I knew. But he was a well-respected member of his field, and I had no reason not to fully give him the benefit of the doubt. As a result, I remained only in awe of the place, without a single thread of looming dread and pending doom. The letter, or whatever, had instructed myself, and I assume the others, to meet at this address, 10 a.m. sharp. The clock in my car read 9:30. I'm frequently being cited as being more than punctual, or always early. However, to my surprise, 4 vehicles lined the interior of the wraparound driveway that encircled a large white oak, about 20 feet from the grand front entrance. 2 4-door sedans, 1 blue and 1 green, 1 black SUV, and 1 pale blue minivan. The first thought that went through my head is that I must somehow be late, even though the instructions specifically signified 10 a.m. on the dot. As I crept up behind the van and put my car in park, I couldn't help but produce a small grin. Looks like I would have at least one thing in common with these people. We all prided ourselves on being early. I stepped out of my car and shut the door. I had intended to head straight for that large entrance in front, but I heard a crescendoing sound of crunching gravel behind me. Another sedan, black, pulled up behind my small, red Prius and slowed to a stop. I decided to hang around for a moment and introduce myself. Walking off before he could get out of the car may have appeared standoffish and rude after all.
Looks like I'm not the only one who likes to make sure I'm on time,
a confident and friendly voice said as the driver's side door opened. I knew it had been intended for my ears. as I spied the man of moderate height and particularly average appearance. I gave him a smile, accepting his comment in the manner of which it was provided. "I'm David," I said, approaching him and outstretching my hand for a shake as he shut the car door behind him.
"I'm Benjamin. You can just call me Ben,"
he said. "Nice to meet you, Ben."
"So, which way do we go?"
he asked me, clearly as much in the dark as I was. "I assume we just head in?" I replied. After a very brief silence, I then asked him if he had any idea what we were going to be doing.
"Not too sure. I know it has something to do with the relationship between the mind and the body, and the effects one has on the other. But that's pretty vague. So, I guess I really have no clue,"
Ben told me earnestly. Before either of us had reached the door, it had begun to open on its own. The door creaked slightly, panning to the side to reveal the face of Dr. Keller. Keller greeted both Ben and I and led us into a large sitting room with 2 couches, a fireplace, and 3 recliner chairs. During my tenure on the project, I kept a daily journal to hold my thoughts for later perusal. No one has seen it, or even knows that I have it, but me. The following is directly from those pages. Recounting all that transpired may be a little difficult for me to recall and sift through, so please bear with me. Day 1, October 3rd, 2014. Today, I learned exactly what we're going to be doing. I assumed that I was brought into the project to monitor the psychological effects on the patients. Keller introduced me to the rest of the staff. Ben I already knew, as we had met on our way inside. Ben's a mental health data technician. Him and I will actually be doing very similar work and serve as a check and balance system for one another. 2 females are with us as well, a woman by the name of Dr. Carol and another by the name of Josie. Keller never provided us with last names. Carol appeared to be close to the age of Dr. Keller. Josie was more my age range. I'm not really here to meet anyone or anything, but she's pretty cute. Smart, too. Carol has been assigned to work directly with Keller in implementing his approach. Josie is our medic. I think she's a surgeon by trade, but adept at performing more medical duties, especially that of first aid and monitoring, much of what she'll likely be performing. There were also another 3 men in the room, but Keller never gave us their names. The guns strapped to their belts made me uneasy, and I could tell it made everyone else feel the same way, even though no one said anything about it. We were told that they were our security team. I wasn't quite sure why a research experiment would need a security unit, but I assumed it had something to do with the project's privacy. The project itself, dubbed the Ascension Project, was to research and observe the effects of the mind on the physical body through subliminal suggestion. Still pretty vague, but I don't think I expected clarification beyond that. As broad as a construct as it was also quite defined in terms of research parameters. Each of us have been assigned different rooms. Ben, Josie, and I have been assigned to the western wing of this place for quarters. Security quarters are located on the 1st floor. Keller said nothing about his or Carol's sleeping quarters, but had us ushered off to get acquainted with our rooms before we could begin later that afternoon. Dr. Carol stayed behind, and I can't help but wonder whether or not they have a thing. Well, I'm gonna go to the mess area, or dining room, as it were, to grab some lunch, where we are all to meet soon. I can't wait to get started. October 3rd, 2014, 11:30 p.m. I have to say, this place is a lot bigger than I first thought it was, and I thought it was quite large from the start. After our meeting downstairs for a lunch of cold sandwiches, mundane yet satisfying, Keller led us through a door just outside the kitchen, in the hallway. I didn't even have to look inside to know where it led. As I watched team members in front of me turn and disappear with a reverberant clomping, I knew what lay beyond was descending stairs. We were being led into the basement. What I didn't expect was the extravagant and elaborate setup. We weren't very far below ground, maybe 20 feet, but I still couldn't help but be reminded of the Hive from Resident Evil. The only contrast was that the sheen or feng shui of the place wasn't as bright or futuristic or vibrant at all. There was a ton of equipment and a few solid metal doors that seemed to lead out of the main large area where we had descended into. But things were more stark and gray. There was an oppressive feel to the place. Keller went over what each of our assignments were. Ben and I were to watch the monitors, which we were told contained patients in rooms. I instantly looked over to the screens. Each of our screens was divided in 4. The smaller pictures each contained a person on a bed in a bland, undecorated room, only a metal door breaking the monotony of gray cement walls. Josie was to stand by down a hallway, found beyond one of those doors, at a med lab where she would await to be called if necessary. I don't see why she couldn't stay out there with Ben and I, but I assumed it to be protocol to have her at the ready near any supplies that she might need in an emergency. 2 of the guards stood by in the room with us. Keller never said anything to them, so I assume that they had already been briefed on their duties. I didn't see the 3rd. I suppose he was likely patrolling the grounds above or something. Dr. Carroll then came through one of the doors to our right. She shut it behind her as she exited, but in the brief amount of time that it was open, I was able to catch a glimpse inside. It was another bedroom-like space, and I'm pretty sure that was her quarters, and likely Keller's as well. To each their own. Keller asked Carroll if she was ready. She nodded in agreement, and with that, we were dispersed. Much of the work seems pretty dull. Ben and I basically sat around and watched 4 people sleep all evening, 3 men and 1 woman. What was really weird, though, is that each was strapped into place on their beds. Are they violent? I plan on asking Dr. Keller the next I see him. Maybe that's why the doors down there are all made of metal. Something else odd happened as well. When Keller left the room with Dr. Carroll, they exited through a door in front of the other 2 monitors that were set up for Ben and I. I had no idea where that door led into, until I saw a door slowly opening in one of the rooms on my monitor. Then, another. Through one door stepped Dr. Carroll, and the other stepped Dr. Keller. They each held a syringe and injected it into the arms of the 2 male subjects. Maybe it's a sedative, I thought to myself. It would make sense since they haven't moved more than a small twitch or reshuffling of weight since we've been down here, like a restlessness while sleeping. But when the fluid had been injected into their veins, the 2 doctors crouched near to the men and whispered something in their ears. The cameras had microphone capabilities, so I could hear them, but they were whispering. I made out little to nothing of what was said. I think some of it may have been Latin, but I can't say for sure. After about 5 minutes of this, they left the rooms. Then, the other 2 doors opened, and the same thing replayed itself out on the monitor screens. The remaining man and 1 woman having been injected and then whispered to. That was it. Keller and Dr. Carroll returned to the main room with us, chatted a bit with Ben and I about observing the scenes for anything unusual before leaving. Keller proceeded to the med lab and Dr. Carroll up the stairs to the 1st floor. The 2 guards remained in the room at all times. I know they've been placed here as protectors, security for us and the project, but their demeanor, they portray themselves as more enforcers than protectors. But maybe a hardened expression just comes with the job requirements. After 4 hours of nothing, Keller relieved me of duty, telling Ben that he and I would be on rotating shifts for most of the duration of our stay. I was told I could eat, rest, study, whatever it was I had to do. The only stipulation, I couldn't leave the grounds, or I'd be relieved from the project permanently. So, I took a walk around the grounds. There's enough woodland surrounding this place that it makes most state parks look small in comparison. When I returned and relieved Ben, I asked him if there was any change. There hadn't been. So, once he had left me to myself, I settled into my chair for a long night of nothing. Why the hell do they need a psychology student to sit and watch cameras? I mean, that's all I did. Nothing happened. Barely a movement at all. I'm so tired from looking at a screen all day. Running statistical data is more fun than this. October 4th, 2014. So, today was more interesting, but said interest came at an expense. When I sat down at the monitors today, there was something wrong. But before I had a chance to confer with anyone, Dr. Keller pulled us all aside, except for Josie, who was at the time looking in on one of the patients, the man in camera 2. I had noticed it as soon as I had looked, but apparently I didn't know the extent. Each of the 4 patients suffered numerous lacerations across most parts of their body. The wounds and bruising was pretty easy to spot, even on the monitor. But what I didn't understand is how, more than why. Each one of them had been restrained. I cut right to the thick of it and asked Keller what the hell happened. Dr. Carroll shot him a look as he explained for us not to be alarmed, that he had predicted this series of events. I wanted a quick explanation, but there was no way that he could tell us the whole truth so hastily. So here, I will write a report of the short of it. Some paranormal events are reported in accordance with wounds, bruising, scratch marks, etc., on the bodies of the subjects with no reason for them being there. Most claim it to be the work of some obscure demon or apparition. Keller told us that he had already proven these instances to be the working of the mind influencing the body, rather than outside forces. Of course, I asked him exactly how, and he replied by citing some technical jargon and an equation that I could not understand, but promised that not only had he proven it, that he had perfected the process, developing a facilitator that was to serve as a, so to speak, lubricant for inducing said episodes. He repeated that this outcome was expected, duly noted, and will be used as baseline findings for the research to follow. I didn't even need to ask him. Ben and I both looked at him so confused, I think he replied to our expressions alone. Keller explained how the mind works in three-dimensional parameters. Before continuing on, he asked us to picture what a three-dimensional sphere may appear to a two-dimensional being as it passes through a two-dimensional plane. As you may be able to picture in your head, it would likely look like a pinpoint that grew into a large circle at the sphere's midpoint, before shrinking back to a pinpoint as it finished passing through the second-dimensional plane. Rudimentary and not likely entirely accurate, but serving as a useful template for understanding his following deliberation. I don't know if he's a genius, mad, or just a fool. Keller believes that through subliminal messaging, that he can influence the mind in such a way that it directly impacts the physicality of the body and of the physical brain, altering perception to a higher dimension. He explained that if there was a higher power, such as God or the devil, that this is how we may likely discover and make contact with such beings, though he also made sure to mention that this was highly doubtful. I was starting to feel uneasy. Ben, too, I could tell. I'll admit it, I thought about just up and quitting that day, but decided against it. After all, if scrapes and a few cuts are the worst to be had, I don't find that reason enough to leave. Besides, that alone is profound evidence for what we're trying to accomplish here. The video logs distinctly show the patients in each room being wounded at around the same time, after both Ben and I had retired. Cuts happening, bruises forming on their own. I've never seen anything like it. There's only 4 more days of the study left, and if we keep making progress at this rate, I'll have my dissertation just about written in my head by the time we close up and compile our results. This was the last chance I had to write. I know, only 2 days. But things went wrong pretty quick. By the time we had figured out what had happened, it was too late. I never got the opportunity to write about what happened on October 5th, 2014, until now. Nothing had happened the previous night, aside from our little chat with Dr. Keller. I'd asked Josie when we passed her in the hall later that evening if she had received the same information, and she told me that Dr. Carroll had briefed her on the same before she had gone in to run tests on the subjects. This is when I finally asked who these patients were, if they were volunteers or recruits. She said she wasn't sure, but heard something about them being transferred from some mental institution. Mental institution, maybe, were her exact words. This sent chills up my spine and the weight of dreadfulness to drop into my gullet. This feeling can still be attributed to the fact that we were experimenting on possible mental patients, but I shook it off just as easily that their loved ones had surely signed release forms. I tried sleeping when I returned to my room, exhausted, but all I managed to do was toss and turn, my mind fitful in its unrest. I'm not too sure how much time had actually passed, but the room seemed to become a bit darker, as if there was some light on that I had not known about that had suddenly switched off. I sat upright in my bed, wide awake anyway, and scanned the room around me. I looked at the digital alarm that I had brought with me to check the time, yet I saw only blackness. That's when I realized it. The power had gone out. I reached for my jeans and a new pair of socks, putting them on before I left the room, wearing the same shirt I had worn to bed. Before I had even closed the door behind me, I heard it. The noise that bellowed from beneath me, and the screams of the people that I had been working with the past few days. The gunshots somewhere in the dark below me. There was more screaming. And then, nothing. I heard a distant growl. But not distant in the normal sense. It was quiet, as if distant, but seemed to be coming from all around me. I turned my head in all directions, trying to pinpoint the noise, and became frantic each time it bellowed so menacingly because I couldn't identify the direction that it was coming from. I almost instinctively called out, "Dr. Keller?" and instantly grasped my hand over my mouth. At that moment, all I wanted to do was take back the noise that had left my lips. I was stuffed to the core in fear, beginning to shake, because I couldn't see or even locate the general vicinity of whatever the hell was out there, somewhere in this expanse of some almost cliché gigantic mansion. But whatever it was, knew exactly where I was now. If it had been listening, it would have been able to vanquish me without my even seeing it coming. I know, why didn't I assume that maybe someone had broken in, or if maybe some vicious animal had gotten loose, before I acted on the thought of some demon or creature. If you had heard that sound, the bellowing, the screaming, the gunshots, and the silence, there was something in it, behind the chaos and the panic that filled the air. Damn it, I can't explain it. It was as if they were below me, on the first floor, but whatever attacked them in the black below was actually all around them, around me. This was no ordinary stalker or burglar. This thing couldn't even be human. I was sure of that. I heard a grumbling, like the building should have shaken around me, but the floor remained still, and I felt no vibrations in my feet. A noise without effect, coming from no place and all places at once. It was a dull, rolling growl at first, that began to grow louder like thunder, crescendoing, threatening to become a bass-level shriek that I cannot fully describe with words. I had to get the fuck out of there. I began to run for the stairs, hoping that whatever threatened to consume my sanity would not catch me there. I had made it down to the first floor. I stared in the direction of the front door. The world shook without shaking again, and I sprinted for my life. I yelled out when something had tackled me to the ground, just feet from my salvation. I swung wildly on the ground with my fists, yelling at whatever it was to get away. Between my shouts, I could hear someone speaking to me, someone frantic. It was Ben, and he was accompanied by Dr. Keller.
"Come on, Dave. We gotta get the fuck out of here."
Ben yelled at me, trying to get me to come to my senses. I hadn't noticed them in my haste and in the dark, but they had been moving towards the door too. Our inadvertent collision had knocked me to the floor. "What the hell's going on? What the hell's that sound?" I yelled at the both of them, wanting answers.
"There's no time for that. We have to get out of here,"
Dr. Keller told me. I immediately noticed the urgency on his face and in his voice. I'd never seen him like this. Up until this point, I don't think I could have even pictured him like this. His professional demeanor had left him. You could tell that he was still struggling to hold on to his professionalism, but the fear in his eyes was that of a boy enchanted by the shadowy things that lurk under his bed at night. His facade was all but completely gone. I was tugged to my feet by Ben before I could speak another word and practically dragged to the door. And that's when I heard it. The low grumbling turned to a growl, but behind it, there was a clicking, a sound that became more detectable as both noises increased. That's when I realized it. Whatever it wasn't getting louder. It was getting closer. Closer from what seemed like all around us. Ben turned the knob and opened the door, pushing me outside. I turned in time to watch Dr. Keller push past Ben in a hurry to free himself from inside the large home. Quickly regaining his balance, Ben once again took a step towards the outside world. By his second, he was already running. But before his sixth, something happened that I'll never be able to fully explain or forget. Something came out of that door after him. It reached out to grab him before snatching him backwards. It didn't only hurt to look at, but it literally pains me to even think about it. It was black, mostly, but it flecked with all colors. Colors I never even knew existed. Shades outside our realm. It appeared to be made of scales, but not the scales of earth creatures. These were made out of a material completely foreign to our knowledge, and therefore not entirely describable. Its head. It was many heads, but all acting as one. Some had faces appearing to be almost human, like that of patient number 4, the female, but others animal-like, almost reptilian, but of animals I've never seen before. Others were barely discernible as faces. But the true terror of it was its inconsistency, its ability to be shadow, but yet physical. It was there, but kind of not in a way. My brain almost refused to perceive it. It was blurry, and it hurt my head to look at it. But I saw that tentacle thing that grabbed Ben, pull him back to its many mouths, and devoured him proportionately, almost absorbing him into themselves, rather than eating him. When it bellowed, I heard the sound again, and I realized it had been perceived as coming from all around me, because it was actually coming from all around me, from inside my head.
My keys! I don't have my keys!
Dr. Keller was shaking me, violently, despairingly, trying to get my attention. The rest is kind of a blur. I don't really remember what happened, where that thing is, what it was, or the drive back to the university in the dead of night. Keller explained to me later that I had pulled my keys from my jeans and started my Prius before we had even gotten to the car. He told me that I drove, but man, I can't remember a thing. It was the sight of that thing. It was like, once I had seen it, my thoughts could not regulate anything else until it had been processed the best it could be. Maybe. At least, that's my theory. Keller instructed me that we had enough evidence to tell the truth. That something had come from those patients' rooms and spilled out into the observation areas. Whatever it was, it killed everyone but Keller and I. I was still in shock. Dr. Keller reassured me that he would do all the talking. That was basically the last I saw of him, as a free man, that is. Official record? After Keller had told them his insane story, it was deemed likely that I and the others were brainwashed, and I had been fed a delusion to help fabricate a past to conceal their disappearances. I guess their bodies were never found. So too was the house. Yeah, the fucking house was gone. The driveway's still there, still lined in dense forestry, but when the police arrived, they perched upon a vacant lot. Grass spread over the open space, indicating that there had never been a house there. So, Keller didn't go to jail, but he did go insane. He kept going on about fourth-dimensional beings, that he had introduced them to our world, and now they would be here to stay, spawning, increasing their numbers, and ending humanity's rule. I asked him so many times since he's been in there what actually happened, but he always claimed not to know. It must be denial, because he was certainly lying. The other day, Keller passed away. He killed himself by biting off and choking on his own tongue. To my utter surprise, the coot left me everything. His estate, his belongings, and more importantly, his journals. I couldn't help myself. It's mostly ramblings of a mixture between accurate calculations and assertions that mostly evade my intellect, and the ramblings of a madman. But from what I could piece together, he had succeeded. He had transmuted the mind and body to a higher dimensional state. From the looks of it, once shred of third-dimensional existence, the subjects were stripped of their humanity, their perceptions, the beings they once were. What was left was dark, an abomination mocking humanity with its existence in our world, a plague of things that used to be and are determined to be again. Keller never wrote of the house vanishing, but left one chilling thought in the back of my mind. He wrote that he had watched the thing consume Ben, and simply walk off as he had gotten into the car. He said it just walked off into the surrounding forest, and he had not seen or heard from it since. This sends a wave of penetrating fear through the center of my soul, because last night, I could have sworn I heard a deep, bellowing, rumbling growl off in the distance, and it seemed to be coming from all around me.
So we've all heard curiosity killed the cat. Too bad old Dr. Keller decided to ignore this ageless truth. And of course, Dave should pay the price. After all, the fool who follows is at fault for the prisons their devices create. But if you've heard the call of terror in the distance, have no fear. The mayhem returns next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.